Hello and welcome to Education in Focus, powered by Chalkboard News. I'm Dan McCaleb, Vice President of News and Content at the Franklin News Foundation, publisher of ChalkboardNews.com. Chalkboard is a news website dedicated to issues related to K-12 education. Joining me again today, as he does each and every week, is Chalkboard's K-12 editor, Brendan Clary. How are you, Brendan?
Doing well, Dan. How about you?
I am doing well, thank you. We are recording this on Tuesday, February 20th. Brendan, since the invention of the smartphone, schools across the country have struggled to deal with students, their phones, and the distractions to learning that they can cause. A high school in Houston made the recent decision to ban all student cell phone use on campus, leading to a mini revolt by students. But it's been some problems with students that led to the ban. Tell us more about what's going on at James Madison High School in South Houston, Brendan.
Yeah, of course. So the policy here, Dan, is that the Houston Independent School District, they've had a policy that prohibits students from using any cell phones in class, right? But there was some fighting at the school district and some different things that led to the school saying you're not going to be able to have your cell phone at all during lunch. And so that is when students got up in arms and they started protesting outside the school, and they had signs and stuff saying, you know, we're not going to go in there to give up our phones. And I think that they were collecting phones at the main office, and then you get them back at the end of the day. Essentially, those privileges were, as the school says, indefinitely revoked because the cell phone video has been at the center of multiple recent fights on campus. So that was an issue. And basically, reportedly, there's video of one of the school's principal, Edgar Contreras, in an altercation with a student. So it's, you know, that was something that was filmed. And the school district reviewed that and said that it was not a problematic thing, that, you know, maybe it was justified, and that's, you know, the procedure for if a student is acting a certain way, you put them in a hold and sort of neutralize the situation. So they said that there was nothing going on there, but now, you know, the students are basically very up in arms about this and saying that it feels more like a prison. And this is just the backdrop of this down in Houston. There was a takeover from the state, essentially. So the state came in, the Texas Education Agency, they have like a state appointed board of commissioners, I believe. I don't think that it's not like a school board per se. It's not elected. It's a state takeover. And so there was some different test scores, and that was a big thing that I reported on last year when that initially happened. And that was one of the that's happened sometimes in the state's history, I believe. But it is quite rare for the state to come in and say we're going to take this over because of the test scores, because of different individualized education plan issues, I believe. And so essentially, you know, this has been part of that, of like, it's called the new education system. And so it's and Mike Miles is the school superintendent there, who is from the state. And so basically, you know, he had a press conference where he talks about this, and he, you know, laid it out there like, look, we know what happens when students have cell phones. And we know that it is important to make sure that they don't have these in the classroom. And in this case, they lost the opportunity to use them at school, right? So this is kind of interesting backdrop there of like, hey, we're going to really try to turn things around. We know that this is best for schools, students. And specifically, he said, there might be bullying that could happen. Meeting to sell drugs was something that he cited. So, I mean, they, you know, must have issues with that, and all kinds of things can happen on a cell phone. Some students at the high school, they apparently met with Madison school officials, and they have a list of demands. So, you know, they basically told administrators, and I'm looking right at a copy of demands, reportedly a copy of the demands. They said that student voices need to be actually listened to, not just heard, that teachers and students should no longer be micromanaged, that the cell phone policy needs to be immediately repealed, that we're treated like students attending a high school, not convicts in a prison. We are students. We've done nothing wrong. We have protested, spoken up, and retaliated against oppressive policies. So, and they called for specific people to be fired. I mean, this kind of thing of saying this is what we're going to do, and that we need a formal apology to the teachers, staff, and students of James Madison High School. So they're trying to levy these demands. And basically, Superintendent Mike Miles was like, look, we're not in the business of taking orders from students, and we're not going to do this. So it's an interesting sort of thing too. You have, you know, in other school districts, you might see administrators We've kind of heard about the news stories of and written about them of, students are circulating a petition to draw some media attention, and then the administration is sort of like, we're going to back down. I haven't seen anything else since this. I mean, this was well reported, right? We covered this. Some local news covered this as well. Nothing I've seen indicates that they're going to walk back this policy. They're going to continue. And this is what he said during the press conference to reporters as well, that if students are outside of school and they need to be in school, then they'll get suspension. They'll face all the consequences. They don't have the right to just kind of protest indefinitely and not face, those sorts of repercussions at school. So it's kind of this is also part of the broader question about should cell phones be in school, I think, too, Dan. So that's kind of at play here is like, what is the role of cell phones in school? And what do experts say about that? And I mean, I think that, as Superintendent Mike Miles says in Houston, there are some pretty obvious benefits for getting those phones away from students during the school day. And, anecdotally from teachers, it's a huge distraction, right, to have those. But there are people who say, and as we Chalkboard News talked to an expert last year, I believe, there are some people who say this is a thing that students need to know how to manage. They need to know how to use their smartphone sort of in daily life, and how do you sort of, put that aside enough to get stuff done. Basically, how do you learn how to live with that technology, because it's not going away. So you can kind of argue about that. I don't know. So that I feel like you can kind of see both sides there, right? Of like, we don't let students smoke essentially until they're 21. Because we know that they can't handle it. Is the same thing true for smartphones? I'm not sure. That's sort of like the broader debate here. Is should school districts be able to say, look, no cell phones at all?
I'm kind of with you. I can see both sides of it. Certainly the fights going on in schools that are being recorded on cell phones, that's a problem. And that's a problem that starts with the students themselves.
Some parents actually, I don't want to interrupt you, Dan. Some parents actually really don't like this policy either, because they're like, I can't get a hold of my student if something were to happen, and they're worried about their student. So, I mean, I think that there's some generational differences too. Like if you have parents who grew up with cell phones and they expect to be within reach of their kids, it's not like when I went to high school, I didn't have a cell phone for many years. Until I was driving, I didn't have a cell phone.
And then you also have, sadly, you have to bring this into this discussion. You have the issue with school shootings across the country. What if students don't have their cell phones and there's an incident? God forbid, there hopefully will never ever be another incident like that. But we know just from reality that there likely will be. What are students supposed to do if and when something like that happens? Last word, Brennan, then we got to wrap up.
Well, no, and I think that's another fear, right? Is what if something happens, even if a smaller thing, what if something happens and your kid needs to be picked up? And so I think that if a school's going to have that policy, they got to have these other policies in place to make sure that students feel like they can communicate effectively with their parents and with staff.
Thank you for your Chalkboard's reporting on this story, Brendan, but that is all the time we have. Listeners can keep up with developments on the Houston school story, on all stories related to K through 12 education at chalkboardnews.com. For Brendan Clary, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening.
Audible is a great way to gain access to an ever-growing selection of audiobooks. They've got what everyone's listening to: bestsellers, new releases, that story you've been waiting for. Follow the link in our show description to get 30 days of Audible free.